The paint roller slipped from my hand, splattering cerulean blue across the tarp like a comet's tail. I froze, heart pounding, as Ethan's fingers brushed mine, lingering longer than they should have. In that fleeting second, under the fading glow of a Georgia summer afternoon, I knew something had shifted, something I couldn't unfeel. My name's Caleb, and I'm not the kind of guy who believes in moments that change everything. I'm 25, a mechanic who spends his days under the hoods of pickup trucks in a small town outside Atlanta. Life's been a straight line: work, beer with the guys, maybe a date with a girl who never sticks around long enough to matter. Ethan, Thuff's been the constant. My best friend since we were kids, racing bikes down Mulberry Street, laughing until our lungs burned. He's the artist, the dreamer, the one who always saw more in the world than I ever could. When he asked me to help paint his new apartment, I didn't think twice. It was just another Saturday, just another favor. Or so I thought. The apartment was a fixer-upper, a cramped one-bedroom with peeling wallpaper and creaky floors. Ethan had been talking about making it his own for weeks, his voice buzzing with excitement over colors and textures I barely understood. "It's not just paint, Caleb," he'd said, holding up a swatch of blue like it was a piece of the sky. "It's a vibe, a whole mood." I'd rolled my eyes, but I showed up anyway, hauling cans of paint and a six-pack of beer, ready to get it done. We started early, the August heat already pressing through the open windows. Ethan was in his element, flitting between cans of paint, mixing colors with a precision that made me feel like I was watching a chef at work. He was 26, lean and wiry, with sandy blonde hair that always fell into his eyes. Today, he wore an old flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up, and a smudge of paint on his cheek that I kept wanting to wipe off but didn't. I stuck to the practical stuff, taping edges, moving furniture, rolling paint in long, even strokes. We worked in sync, the way we always had, trading dumb jokes and stories about high school pranks. But then, around noon, something shifted. We were painting the living room, and Ethan was trying to reach a high corner near the ceiling. He stretched, balancing on a wobbly ladder, and I grabbed his wrist to steady him. "Careful, Picasso," I teased, but my voice caught when his eyes met mine. They were hazel, flecked with gold, and for a moment, they held me like gravity. He didn't pull away. Neither did I. "Caleb," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. My name sounded different in that moment, like a question he'd been holding back for years. My pulse thundered in my ears, and I felt the weight of his gaze. Searching, waiting. I let go of his wrist, but my hand hovered, unsure where to land. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, like the world had narrowed to just us. I stepped back, muttering something about needing a break, and grabbed a beer from the cooler. My hands were shaking, and I didn't know why. Ethan didn't say anything, just went back to painting, but I could feel his eyes on me every time I turned away. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of paint fumes and silence, each of us pretending nothing had happened. But something had. I could feel it in the way my skin prickled when he stood too close, in the way I couldn't stop replaying that moment in my head. By the time the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the half-painted walls, we'd finished the living room. Ethan stood back, hands on his hips, surveying our work. "Not bad, right?" he said, flashing that lopsided grin that always made me feel like I was in on some secret. I nodded, but my throat was tight. I wanted to ask him what that moment on the ladder meant, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I said, "You owe me pizza for this." "Deal." He laughed, but his eyes lingered on me a second too long. As we cleaned up, I caught him watching me again, his expression unreadable. I didn't know what scared me more, the possibility that he felt something, or the fact that I might too. That night, lying in my own bed, I couldn't sleep. The memory of his hand on mine burned in my mind. A question I wasn't ready to answer. I'd spent my whole life thinking I knew who I was, what I wanted. But Ethan was unraveling me, one brushstroke at a time. The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. The kind you get when you know you've stepped into something you can't walk back from. Ethan's apartment was only a 10-minute drive, but I sat in my truck for 20, staring at the steering wheel like it held answers. I told myself I was just overthinking it. Ethan was my friend. Nothing more. But the way his hand had lingered on mine wasn't nothing. It was a spark, and I was terrified of what it might ignite. When I finally showed up, Ethan was already painting the bedroom, a soft gray that made the room feel calmer than I did. He looked up, paintbrush in hand, and grinned. "Thought you'd bailed on me, man." His voice was light, but there was an edge to it, like he was testing the waters. I shrugged, grabbing a roller, trying to act normal. "Nah, just slept in. You know me." We worked in silence for a while. The only sounds the swish of paint and the hum of a fan in the corner. Every time our shoulders brushed or our eyes met, my chest tightened. I kept waiting for him to say something, to acknowledge the moment from yesterday. But he didn't. Instead, he talked about his art, about a gallery in Atlanta that might show his work. I nodded along, half listening, my mind stuck on the way his fingers had curled around mine. Around midday, we took a break on the fire escape, sitting side by side with cans of soda, sweating in the heat. The city sprawled below us, a patchwork of rooftops and distant skyscrapers. Ethan leaned back, his knee bumping mine, and I didn't move away. "You ever feel like you're running out of time?" he asked suddenly, his voice low. I glanced at him, caught off guard. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, but there was a weight to his words. "Time for what?" I asked, my voice rougher than I meant it to be. He hesitated, then turned to me, his gaze piercing. "To be honest. With yourself. With other people." My heart stuttered. I wanted to ask what he meant, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I took a sip of soda, the cold burn doing nothing to ease the heat rising in my chest. The rest of the day, I threw myself into painting, trying to drown out the questions swirling in my head. Ethan was quieter too, but every now and then, I'd catch him watching me, his expression soft and unguarded. It was like he was waiting for me to make the next move, but I didn't know what that move was supposed to be. By evening, we'd finished the bedroom, and the apartment was starting to feel like his. We ordered pizza, sprawled on the couch, and watched some dumb action movie on his ancient TV. It should have been normal, just two friends hanging out. But the air between us was charged, like a storm waiting to break. When he handed me a slice, his fingers brushed mine again, and this time, he didn't pull away. Neither did I. "Caleb," he said, his voice barely audible over the movie. I turned to him, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. His eyes were searching mine, and for a moment, I thought he might lean closer. But then he looked away, running a hand through his hair. "Never mind," he muttered, and the moment slipped away. I left his place that night feeling like I'd dodged a bullet or maybe missed a chance. Back in my truck, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I'd spent my whole life playing it safe, keeping my feelings locked up tight. But Ethan was cracking that open, and I wasn't sure I could handle what was spilling out. Monday morning hit like a punch, dragging me back to the auto shop and the grind of oil changes and tire rotations. But Ethan was still there, in the back of my mind, his touch a ghost that wouldn't fade. I kept replaying our weekend, dissecting every glance, every word, until my head ached. By the time I got to his place that evening to finish the kitchen, I was a mess of nerves and questions I didn't know how to ask. Ethan greeted me with a smile, but there was a tightness in his eyes, like he was carrying something heavy. The kitchen was small, barely room for both of us, and the close quarters made it impossible to ignore the tension. We painted in near silence. The only sounds the clink of paint cans and the soft hum of a radio in the corner. I kept stealing glances at him, noticing the way his jaw clenched when he thought I wasn't looking. Halfway through, he broke the silence. "You okay, Caleb? You're quieter than usual." His voice was casual, but his eyes were sharp, like he could see right through me. "Yeah, just tired," I lied, focusing on the wall. But my hands were unsteady, and I ended up smearing paint across my knuckles. Ethan laughed, grabbing a rag to wipe it off, and when his fingers brushed mine, I flinched. He froze, the rag still in his hand, and for a moment, neither of us moved. "Caleb," he said, his voice soft but urgent. "What's going on with you?" I opened my mouth to deflect, to make some dumb joke, but nothing came out. His eyes were locked on mine, and I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. "I don't know," I admitted finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what this is." He didn't say anything, but he didn't look away either. Slowly, he set the rag down and stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the paint and cedarwood cologne on him. "Do you want to know?" he asked, his voice so low it sent a shiver down my spine. I should have said no. I should have grabbed my keys and walked out. But I didn't. Instead, I nodded, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break. Ethan reached out, his hand hovering near mine. And this time, he didn't pull back. His fingers closed around mine, warm and steady, and I didn't let go. For a long moment, we just stood there, hands clasped, the world outside the kitchen fading away. I felt like I was falling, but for the first time, I wasn't scared. I was alive. Then the radio crackled, some old country song cutting through the silence. And we both laughed, the tension breaking like a wave. But his hand stayed in mine, and when we went back to painting, something had changed. The air felt lighter, like we'd crossed a line we couldn't uncross. That night, we didn't talk about it. We finished the kitchen, ate leftover pizza, and acted like nothing had happened. But when I left, Ethan hugged May a real hug, not the quick bro hug we'd always done. His arms lingered, and I let them, my heart racing with a truth I wasn't ready to name. The next few days were a blur of work and avoidance. I threw myself into the shop, taking extra shifts, anything to keep my mind off Ethan. But he was everywhere, in the smell of paint on my clothes, in the way my hands still felt warm where he'd touched them. I'd spent my whole life thinking I knew who I was, Caleb, the guy who fixed cars, drank beer, dated girls. But now, every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's face, and it scared the hell out of me. By Thursday, I couldn't avoid him anymore. He texted me, asking if I'd help with the bathroom, the last room to paint. I wanted to say no, to keep my distance until I could figure out what was happening inside me. But I couldn't. I showed up at his place, my stomach in knots, and found him already at work, painting the walls a soft green. He looked up when I walked in, his smile hesitant but warm. "Thought you might ghost me," he said, half joking. "Nah," I said, grabbing a brush. "I'm here." But my voice was tight, and he noticed. He always noticed. We painted in silence for a while, the small bathroom forcing us closer than I was ready for. Every time our arms brushed, my skin burned. I kept my eyes on the wall, focusing on the steady rhythm of the brush. But my thoughts were a mess. What was this? A crush? Something more. I'd never felt this way about a guy, hell. I'd never felt this way about anyone. And Ethan, with his quiet smiles and steady hands, was making it impossible to ignore. Halfway through, he stopped painting and turned to me. Caleb, can we talk? His voice was serious, and my stomach dropped. I nodded, setting my brush down, bracing myself for whatever was coming. He took a deep breath, his eyes searching mine. I don't know how to say this without screwing it up, but I've been feeling something for a while, and I think you might feel it too. His words hit like a freight train, and I couldn't breathe. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. I don't want to mess up what we have, but I can't keep pretending this is just nothing. I stared at him, my mind racing. Every instinct told me to run, to laugh it off, to keep things the way they'd always been. But then I looked at him, really looked, and saw the fear in his eyes. The same fear I felt. He was risking everything, laying his heart bare, and I couldn't let him stand there alone. I'm scared, I admitted, my voice cracking. I don't know what this means. Ethan, I don't know who I am anymore. He reached out, his hand finding mine, and this time, I didn't flinch. You're still you, he said softly, and I'm still me. We're just figuring it out together. I wanted to believe him, but the weight of it, Almy family, my friends, the life I'd built pressed down on me. I pulled my hand away, muttering something about needing air, and stepped outside. The night was cool, the stars sharp against the sky, and I stood there, trying to make sense of the chaos inside me. Ethan didn't follow, but I could feel his presence, steady and patient, waiting for me to decide what came next. The weekend came, and with it, a reckoning. Ethan's apartment was nearly done, just some touch-ups left. But I knew it wasn't about the paint anymore. It was about us, about the truth we'd been circling. I showed up Saturday morning, my heart heavy with questions I still didn't have answers for. Ethan was waiting, his eyes bright but cautious, like he was bracing for me to bolt. We worked on the final details, trim around the windows, a second coat in the hallway. The apartment felt alive now, every wall a piece of Ethan's vision. But the air between us was thick, every glance a conversation we weren't having. By afternoon, we were done, and the silence was unbearable. Caleb, Ethan said finally, setting down his brush. We can't keep doing this, pretending nothing's changed. He was right, but the words still stung. I leaned against the wall, staring at the floor, trying to find the courage to say what I felt. I don't know how to do this, I said, my voice raw. You're my best friend. Ethan, what if this ruins everything? He stepped closer, his expression soft but determined. What if it doesn't? What if it's better? His words hung in the air, a challenge and a promise. Before I could think, he closed the distance between us, his hand cupping my face. His touch was gentle, but it set my heart racing. I'm not asking you to have all the answers, he said. I just want you to be honest. With me. With yourself. I closed my eyes, letting his words sink in. I'd spent my life building walls, keeping people at arm's length. But Ethan was different. He'd always been different. I opened my eyes and found him watching me, his face inches from mine. And then, without thinking, I kissed him. It was tentative at first, a question more than a statement. But then he kissed me back, and the world fell away. It was just us, two people finding each other in a half-painted room, paint smudges on our hands and hope in our hearts. When we pulled apart, I was trembling, but I wasn't scared anymore. I was free. We didn't say much after that. We cleaned up, ordered takeout, and sat on the floor, our shoulders touching. For the first time, I let myself feel with warmth. The possibility. The truth I'd been running from. But even as I leaned into Ethan, a part of me knew this was just the beginning. The world outside his apartment wouldn't be as forgiving, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what came next. The next week was a whirlwind. Ethan and I didn't put a label on what we were, but we didn't need to. We spent every evening together, painting forgotten as we talked, laughed, and stole kisses in the quiet of his apartment. It was like discovering a new language, one I'd never known I could speak. But outside those walls, the world was waiting, and I knew it wouldn't be kind. I started noticing things I hadn't before: the way my coworkers at the shop talked about those people, the way my dad's voice hardened when the news mentioned pride parades. I'd grown up in a town where being different wasn't just frowned upon. It was a sin. And now, I was different. I was falling for Ethan, and the weight of that truth was starting to crush me. One night, we went to a bar in Atlanta, a place Ethan said was safe. It was loud, crowded, and alive in a way that made my skin hum. We sat in a corner booth, our knees touching under the table, and for a while, I let myself forget the world outside. But then I saw him, Jake, a guy from the shop, standing at the bar. He didn't see us, but my heart stopped. If he did, if he told anyone, my life as I knew it would be over. I pulled away from Ethan, my hands shaking. "We should go," I said, my voice tight. He looked at me, hurt flickering in his eyes, but he nodded. We left in silence, the drive back to his place heavy with unspoken words. When we got there, he turned to me, his voice steady but raw. "Caleb, I can't do this if you're ashamed of me. Of us." "I'm not ashamed," I said, but the words felt hollow. I was terrified not of him, but of what loving him meant. I wanted to be brave, to be the man he deserved, but I didn't know how. He reached for my hand, but I pulled back, muttering something about needing time. I left him standing in the doorway, his eyes full of a pain I'd caused. The next day, I called in sick to work and drove to the lake where Ethan and I used to fish as kids. I sat on the shore, skipping stones across the water, trying to make sense of the mess inside me. I loved Ethan, I knew that now. But loving him meant facing a world that might hate us for it. And I wasn't sure I was strong enough. Days turned into weeks, and I kept my distance from Ethan. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to figure out who I was before I could be with him. I threw myself into work, ignoring his texts, hating myself for every unanswered message. But the silence was killing me, and I knew it was killing him too. One evening, I found myself back at his apartment, uninvited, my heart in my throat. He opened the door, his face a mix of surprise and guarded hope. "Caleb," he said, his voice soft but wary. "What are you doing here?" "I'm sorry," I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "I'm scared. Ethan, I'm scared of what this means, of what people will think. But I'm more scared of losing you." My voice broke, and I looked down, unable to meet his eyes. "I love you. I think I always have." For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he stepped forward, pulling me into a hug that felt like coming home. "I love you too," he whispered, and I felt the weight of the world lift. Just for a moment, we stood there, holding each other, the half-painted walls bearing witness to a truth we'd both been afraid to name. But love wasn't enough to erase the challenges ahead. I told my sister first, expecting judgment but finding only warmth. "You're still my brother," she said, hugging me tight. It gave me hope. But telling my parents was another story. When I finally did, over a tense dinner, my dad's face hardened, and my mom cried. "This isn't you, Caleb," my dad said, his voice cold. I left their house feeling like I'd lost a piece of myself. But I held on to Ethan's hand, knowing I'd found something worth fighting for. At the shop, rumors started. Jake had seen us at the bar, and the whispers spread like wildfire. I lost friends, heard slurs muttered behind my back. But I kept going, fueled by Ethan's quiet strength. He was my anchor, my reason to keep moving forward, even when it hurt. Months later, Ethan's apartment was complete, a home filled with color and life. We stood in the living room, the same room where it all began, and I felt a peace I'd never known. The world outside wasn't perfect. There were still hard days. People who didn't understand. Battles we'd have to fight. But we were together, and that was enough. One evening, Ethan pulled out a canvas, a painting he'd been working on in secret. It was us, standing in that half-painted room, hands clasped, paint smudges on our fingers. The colors were vibrant, the emotion raw, and in the corner, he'd written, "To Caleb, my home." I couldn't speak, my throat tight with love and gratitude. I pulled him close, kissing him softly, knowing this was where I belonged. We didn't have all the answers. My family was still struggling to accept me, and the town wasn't exactly rolling out the welcome mat. But every time I looked at Ethan, I saw a future worth building. We were more than a moment, more than a brushstroke. We were a love that had changed everything. As we stood there, surrounded by walls we'd painted together, I realized that life wasn't about knowing who you were from the start. It was about having the courage to become who you were meant to be. And with Ethan by my side, I was ready to face whatever came next.